Hello again. As you know, I am Eli, the computer guy, and today's class is Introduction to Web Based Geolocation. So what we are going to be talking about today is how computer devices figure out where you are in the world geographically. So this has become something that has become more and more important over the last few years. So 5 years ago, back in 2008, geolocation was really not that big a deal. People didn't worry about it. People didn't care about it. It was something that was still off on the horizon. Now, geolocation is becoming very, very relevant in all of our lives. Basically, geolocation allows the concept of what is called augmented reality. So the idea is that with computing devices, the computer devices can interact with the outside physical world to give you additional features in the physical world. So the idea is with something like geolocation, if you are walking by, let's say, a store that has a sale for some kind of item that you might be interested in, you can automatically be alerted that that's happening. That is one of the concepts around augmented reality. Now, when we start talking about geolocation, a lot of new computer people go, because they think this is a really complicated concept. They think it is very sophisticated and they think it's way over their head. When you start talking with new computer people, they think geolocation is this fancy thing that they'll be able to use, years from now, but not today. As I talk about in many of my classes, though, geolocation from a usability standpoint is actually very simple. So the underlying technology that makes geolocation work is very complicated, very sophisticated, and you need a PhD in order to understand it. But for you as a new developer, for you as a new computer technician, the ability to use geolocation is actually very easy. It's even built into HTML5. I will show you, as part of this introduction, a little bit of code that allows you to grab the physical location of a computer device, again, simply by tossing a little bit of code through an HTML5 capable web browser. You can get somebody's location. So when we're talking about geolocation, again, we're talking about computers and we're talking about devices such as iPhones and iPads and Android tablets and trying to figure out where they are in the world. Generally, there are three ways that this happens. And again, they're not very complicated and they're not the way that most people think it would happen. So back in the old days, when we used to talk about being able to find the location of things like radios, things like cell phones, they used to use something called triangulation. What triangulation did is it measured the time it took for a piece of information to travel over a radio frequency from whatever was transmitting the data to multiple different antennas that were receiving the data. They then triangulated where the location of the radio was. So back in the old days, back in the 90s, if you had some kind of radio or if you had a cell phone, they used to do something called triangulation that used radio antennas to try to basically pick up where the radio signal was coming from. It would measure the length of time it took for the signal to get from point A to point B, and then using a bunch of fancy math, it would figure out where that radio was. Nowadays, that is not how web-based geolocation works. The first way that web-based geolocation works is actually very simple and probably not the way that you're thinking about. Let's go over to the whiteboard and I'll show you some of this before we go to the computer, so I can actually give you a demonstration. So basically, the idea with geolocation from the first part is simply that the web browser or the computing device is querying a database. So whenever you're dealing with IP addresses, you're dealing with something called ARIN. What is this? It's the Internet numbering organization. So ARIN is the organization that deals with all Internet numbering. So IP addresses, if you talk about 208.66.55.4, if you buy that as a static IP address out on the internet, you are actually buying that at the end of the day from Aaron. Well, one of the things that Aaron requires is that when a company buys an IP address, it requires that the company state where the IP address will be located at. So if you are a major company and you decide to buy an IP address, let's say 208.66.55.4, one of the things you do is you say, I'm going to buy this IP address and I'm going to use it at 492 Broad Street, New York, 21189, or whatever it is. So basically, when you buy this IP address, you actually tell Aaron where that IP address is going to be located. Now, as I've shown you in the PHP classes, and I've shown you in other classes, whenever you go to a website, whenever you open up a website with your web browser using a bit of PHP code, you can very easily ask the web browser what the person's external IP address is. So if I go to a website, the web browser using, or the website using a piece of PHP code can ask what IP address I'm coming from. Then all that needs to happen for geolocation is it takes that IP address, it runs a little algorithm that asks the Aaron database or another database what physical address that IP address corresponds to, and then it returns it. So essentially, again, this is nothing very sophisticated. When you go to the website asks for your external IP address. It takes that external IP address, matches it against a database with a physical address, and therefore the website now knows physically where you are coming from. So that's what happens with these companies, like major companies. If you have a company like GE, if you have, let's say, a data center that you're running, basically you can get very, very specific with these IP addresses and the physical address, because if a data center buys 10 IP addresses, when they give the address for where those IP addresses are going to be located, that is the specific location. Now, where this gets little vaguer is when we get to the ISP world, the Internet Service Provider. So this works best when you specifically buy the IP address from Aaron. So you have to be a major corporation. A major corporation, again, is something like an ISP, an Internet Service Provider. Now, what happens when an ISP buys this particular IP address, they will tell Aaron where their central office is that the IP address is going to be located at. So basically what they say is, we're going to have this one office where all of our internet connections are going to come into, and that's where this IP address is going to be at. Then what happens is all the different people that are using the internet, people like me, people like you, so on and so forth, we're out. When we get on the internet, when I get on Comcast or when I get on Fios, my connection gets routed through that central office and then goes out to the internet. There are central offices in lots and lots of places. So basically when this query is run, the person will not be able to figure out the specific location of where I'm at, but it will know the general location. So it'll say, like with me, I'm in Baltimore. So when somebody runs the query, it'll say, oh, Eli is using Comcast and he's in Baltimore. So that way, when I go to a website, the person knows that, again, I'm using Comcast and I'm in Baltimore. They don't get quite as specific, but it's still pretty good. So I know when visitors are coming from Baltimore, I know when visitors are coming from New York, I know when visitors are coming from San Jose. So this is the first way that you can do geolocation. And again, as I talked about, it's probably not the way you were thinking about. All you're doing is querying a database to find out what the physical address matches to that IP address. Now, the next way that they do this geolocation is, you probably have heard a lot about from Google. So Google has gotten into a little bit of trouble with this recently with their whole mapping system. So Google has special cars and they're going all over the country, all over the world, driving down different roads and basically taking pictures of everything. So Google Street View. Well, one of the things that Google Street View cars are doing, beyond simply taking pictures, they're also doing a bit of something called war driving. War driving is where, while they're driving, wherever they're at, they're trying to pick up the different wireless access points as they go. So the idea is, as the car is driving down the road and different houses have their wireless access points broadcasting their SSIDs, as the car goes by, the car has a little system in it which will log the SSID and the MAC address of this wireless access point. It also has a GPS receiver in it. So basically, whenever it sees the SSID and MAC address, it looks at what the current GPS location is, and then again, it puts that information into a database. So that is how it works when we're dealing with these wireless access points, when we're dealing with things like Street View. So the idea here is, again, you can query the database later, and you can say, hey, I am currently near a wireless access point with this SSID and this MAC address. What is the latitude and longitude that is associated with this? So Google took the MAC address and the SSID, it matched it to a latitude, longitude, and it keeps it in its database. So me later, I can take this information and then it will give me what the specific location is. Again, that all happens because as they're driving, as they're collecting information, they're collecting the GPS information and the wireless information all at the same time. And again, that just goes into a database. So did you think all of this was basically database related? But yeah, so modern geolocation really has much more to do with databases than it has to do with triangulation, as you may have thought about in the past. The final way that they do web-based geolocation is simply by the GPSs already built in to your computers, your tablet devices, or your smartphones. So I have an iPad that has the Verizon plan on it, so it has a GPS unit built in. So one of the things that happens with geolocation, if I use my iPad, is it will say, am I allowed to tell this website where you're at? If I say yes, all it does is it asks the GPS what the latitude and the longitude that I'm at is, and then it sends that information off to Twitter or Facebook, so on and so forth. So this is how geolocation works in the web world. Again, in the radio world, when you're dealing with radio signals, when you're dealing with television signals, is a little bit different. Well, it's a lot different, really. But in the web-based world, this is how it is. Basically, you either have all the information already written out and it's given to Aaron. All you do is you query the database. Or you have a company like Google that goes around that picks up wireless access points, matches it to the current GPS coordinate, puts that into a database, and then you can query it. Or again, if you have a GPS unit built into your computer, your tablet, or your iPhone, the web browser can query that information and then send it off. So that is all that's happening. And this will make a little bit more sense when we go back over to the computer and I actually show you a demonstration here. So here we are, back at my computer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a couple of examples of how this geolocation works. Now, when you're thinking about geolocation, there's two reasons that you care about geolocation. The first reason is probably what you're thinking about, is that you want to know where you're at. So again, if you want to check in at the local Starbucks, or if you want to check in at the local public library, then that is one reason you would use geolocation. If you're using geolocation for yourself, you can be much more specific than if you're trying to get somebody else's geolocation, the location of somebody else. So if I have an app that's built into my phone, or if I'm going to a website and I click allow geolocation, that is going to be a very, very specific point. The other reason that you might be using geolocation, I have had to use this a lot, is to find out where visitors to your website or server are coming from. So you can see this for very normal reasons that you would think about, such as, do I have more people coming to my website from Baltimore or from New York City? The other reason is to see if you may have issues and if you need to close down, if you need to secure your servers. So as I've talked about in the past, some of my fans don't know when to log off. And so when I go to my website, I will see my website getting spammed. What I can do is I can use their IP addresses to find out their general locations in the world, and then I can decide what security measures I want to take. So one of the people that I had a problem with was out of Italy. So if I looked at the IP address, every time I had spam, every time I had a problem, it was always a different IP address in Italy, all about around the same general location. And so what I was able to do is, since I knew the location they were coming from, I was actually able to block that region of the world. So no matter what IP address they used in that region of the world, I just said, that part of Italy, I don't want any traffic coming to my website. Unfortunately, sometimes you can use a scalpel, and sometimes you have to use a blunt tool when you're using geolocation for security, but that is one of the things you can do. So I want to show you how this works so you can get the idea, because it really is, it's just an invaluable, wonderful thing once you know how to use it. So this is Aaron. Okay, so it was American Registry for Internet Numbers. So this is the major organization you have to go through if you want to buy an IP address. So if you're something like a data center, if you're a Facebook, if you're a Google, if you're a Verizon, if you're an AT&T, you would go through ARIN, ARIN.net in order to buy an IP address. And again, when you actually go to buy the IP addresses, it's going to ask you specifically for what location this IP address is going to be used at. So now let's go over to my website. So this, again, I have a community called etcgcommunity.com, and I use this. It's a forum, so people can go to my forum, they can ask questions, they can converse amongst themselves, and again, sometimes people either don't know when to log off or they try to spam the site. So all the people that have been banned, this is a whole list of people that have been banned, and you will see that there's a number of things that get logged. So I have a user ID that gets logged. I have the display name that gets logged. We have the fake email address they they gave me that's been logged. But they also give me the IP address of where this person was coming from. So you'll see generally all these are unique IP addresses: 50.117.114.82, 113.109.111.99, so on and so forth. So these are all the places that these people have come from. So what I can do is I can simply highlight the IP address from where they came from, and then I can go to a website called iplocation.net. Here, let me grab a different IP address actually. So iplocation.net, what this website does is it goes out and it queries that database to ask where that IP address is located at. So all I have to do is plug in the person's IP address here. I hit query, and now it tells me where the IP address is located. So 113.109.111.99 is out of China, Guangdong region, Guangzhou city, and the ISP is ChinaNet Guangdong Province Network. So this tells me the country, the region, and the city it's coming from, so I know that. And then if I'm having problems with this particular IP address, let's say trying to hack my website, I then have the information to go and contact the ISP. So this is where you'll hear a lot with the hackers, where they say that they found the person's IP address and then they contacted the ISP and then the ISP shut the person down. This is how it happens. So we have a different IP address here. That one is actually blocked. So you can't always get it. Let me try a different IP address just to show you how all this works. But basically, this gives you the general idea of where the IP address is and then who to talk to. So this particular one, 66.79.161, is in the United States, is in California, Redwood City, and if I was having major problems that I wanted to deal with, I could contact DCS Pacific Star LLC, give them the IP address, and then they could deal with this person. So that's the first thing. And again, this is important. You know, I run the website. I'm trying to make sure it's useful for everybody. I'm trying to make sure that the spam that doesn't get clogged up with spam. So by being able to track down where people are coming to my site from physically, again, I know where they're coming from, and I know things such as what ISP they're using, so if they try to hack me too much, I can actually try to shut them down. So that's a good thing. The next thing to show you is that all your geolocation can be gathered from simple HTML5 code. So I'm on w3schools.com, just to show you. I don't want to write out this code, I'll just use their example. But here's HTML5 geolocation. If we scroll down, we can see that it's supported by Internet Explorer, by Firefox, by Opera, by Google Chrome, and by Safari. So this HTML5 geolocation code is supported by just about every web browser that you're going to use. And here's a simple sample of the HTML5 geolocation code. So it opens a script, it gives different information, and this will actually pull the person's latitude and longitude. So I can go and I can try for myself, and I can go over here and I can say try it. So this code here creates the form that will get my latitude and longitude. So I click try it, and you can see here it gives me latitude and it gives me longitude. Now you may be saying, okay, well, latitude and longitude, how useful is that really? Well, what I can do is I can copy that. I can go to Google, and then I can actually search based on that latitude and longitude. And if we scroll down, we can see that this is basically where I am in the world. I don't want to get too specific because this is my house, but basically I know that this is essentially where I am in the world. It is a little bit off. So that's what you can do with the latitude and longitude. Once you have, again, that number, then you can use that number to query something. So you can query Google Maps, or query MapQuest, or query some other kind of database in order to do something, in order to do things like augmented reality. So basically that is all there is to web-based geolocation. It's not sophisticated, or it's not that hard for you to use. It's just one of those things that's built into everything now. So when you're doing this, again, with geolocation, you can either try to figure out the location of somebody else, or you can try to figure out your location. If you're trying to figure out somebody else's location, it'll be less specific. So you'll get like a basic region. You'll probably get within a couple of miles of where they are at. You probably won't get specifically where they're at. But that can be useful, again, to know what city they're coming out of, to know what country they're coming out of, so on and so forth. Or if you are trying to ask for your own location, then it can get very specific, because it can do things such as if you have an iPhone or a tablet device, it's the programming is already built in for the mobile app or for that HTML5 website to be able to grab the information from the GPS that's already built on. Again, when you go for geolocation, we're not doing triangulation like the old days. Most of this is simply querying databases. So when a major company buys an IP address, they buy the IP address and then they tell Aaron specifically where that IP address is going to be physically located. So if you can get somebody's IP address, you can simply query Aaron's database and then see where the company says is located. Again, if you're dealing with a major company, it'll be very specific. If you're dealing with something like an ISP, that IP address will be located wherever their central office is, which again will be within a few miles of the physical location of the person, but won't be specifically there. Or, again, you have things like Google with their cars driving around. They're picking up all these people's open wireless access points that are broadcasting the SSID and MAC address. All Google does is they have a GPS that's recording latitude and longitude. Whenever it picks up a wireless access point. It then records the SSID and the MAC address. It matches it to the current coordinates for the on the GPS, and again it puts that into a database so it can be queried. And then finally, again, if you have a GPS actually built into your device, HTML5 or the mobile app can query the GPS that's built in and give you the information. So that's all there is to it. Again, a couple years ago, none of this existed, or if it did exist, nobody cared. Now this stuff is becoming more and more and more important. We will have some classes on this in the future, but I just want you to realize how simple it is. Again, that the ipfinder.net is a very easy way. You can put in somebody's IP address and find their general location. So that's a very easy way to find somebody's location. Or if you go over to w3schools.com, you can take a look at the HTML5 geolocation code. Again, it's not too complicated. I didn't go over it specifically today, but you can go there and read it and see how it works. It's, as you saw, what is it? It's 15 lines of code. It's no big deal. So yeah. So as you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy. This was Introduction to Web Based Geolocation. As always, I enjoy teaching this class and look forward to seeing you at the next one.